Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. We're still down this week, but are revisiting a segment that we did on the Archaeopteryx. As you may or may not know, birds are the only group of dinosaurs that survived when an asteroid hit the Earth 66 million years ago. A fossil called Archaeopteryx, with feathers, hollow bones, clawed wings, tiny teeth, and a long tail, is the earliest known dinosaur that also qualifies as a bird, and is on display at the Field Museum. We were super excited because one of our listeners, Ryan, actually emailed us saying that him and his girlfriend are avid birders, have listened to all of our episodes on a road trip visiting national parks, and decided for their next trip they wanted to visit the Archaeopteryx at the Field Museum. They had a blast, sent us a ton of photos from their trip, and went to a few ramen restaurants that we recommended, so it was so cool to interact with them. We thought we'd revisit the Archaeopteryx in case anyone else felt inspired and wanted to check it out. Okay, go grab your rock chisel, I think, and let's get into it. All right, well, welcome back, everyone, to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This is RJ, and I'm with John, Shannon, and Amanda. Did we want to talk about, is there something new going on at the Field Museum?
No, nothing.
No?
Nothing at all.
Nothing small, nothing old, nothing fossilized.
Nothing with feathers. Nothing like the first, what people often consider the first bird. So Chicago has the Chicago Archaeopteryx, and it was announced very recently, and the specimen is awesome. It's right now, you can go to the museum and you can see it. It'll eventually have some bigger exhibition around it, but this specimen is beautiful. It might be the most complete one, the best prepared one, because it was prepared not by people who wanted to sell it, but by people who wanted to preserve every bit of it for science, not adding bits and pieces of bones that, aren't really there. So it's really pretty spectacular, even down to seeing how many vertebrae there are in the tail, which was unknown before the Field Museum people started looking at the new specimen. So it's the 13th one. There are 12 elsewhere. I think all of them are from Germany. Now there's so many, we should see if we can have Jingmei on to talk about this bird, but there's so many things you can know now about Archaeopteryx, not just how old it is, 140 to 150 million years old. I mean, that's old. That's way older than the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's older than lineages of modern birds. But we know what modern birds look like, and so what we can do is estimate what this bird did. So it clearly flew. It has feathers that are like modern birds with asymmetrical veins. So if you look at the flight feather of a modern bird, the center part of it isn't in the center. It's offset a bit, and that helps you form an airfoil as a wing. So you wouldn't need that if you weren't flying. And in fact, previous dinosaur feathers don't have that. So that's how we know that they're likely not flying, because feathers can be used for a lot of things. They can be used for display. They can be used for warmth. But obviously in birds and the lineages leading up to birds, they were used for flight. So they have very specific characteristics of flighted birds.
So is this the first, so it was the first bird, is it also the first, animal to fly?
Yeah,
so
no. these are completely, because there were pteranodons that I think probably
and
predate
insects.
them.
Lots and lots of
insects,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah, but at the base of that tree, with all this diversification eventually leading to modern birds. And so that's why it's so fascinating to scientists. And the specimen itself is actually surprisingly small.
Yeah, it's like a bird in that sense. When you look at the skeleton of a bird, birds are way smaller than you think they are. If you think of an owl being pretty big, but if I showed you an owl skeleton, you'd be like, what? Yeah. That's probably a screech owl. And you're like, no, that's a great gray owl. They just look so tiny once you strip all the feathers off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it is surprisingly small.
Right, but it's definitely got traits that are more dinosaur-like than they are modern bird-like. Yeah. But it's got hollow bones, which is
got
one
vertebrae
of the
all the way in
flight,
its tail, which modern birds don't have. It has teeth.
Yeah.
It seems to not have a feathered head, at least as far as looking at feather tracks do. But the cool thing about what we know about modern birds now, the inside of feathers, there are fossils that you can use scanning electron microscopy at, and you can see that the melanosomes inside of the feathers, because some specimens are preserved well enough that you can see that, and you can infer what it might be. And that it looks like these birds were black, maybe not completely black. And if you look at the artist rendition of the Chicago specimen of Archaeopteryx, you'll see that it has some white on it as well as black, because those are common colors that are in birds now that are in habitats that, like the Archaeopteryx was thought to be in.
I always say they should do a whole exhibit pulling together all the ways in which Archaeopteryx has been depicted by people, just because nobody had any idea necessarily what it looked like, and so you had complete freedom to kind of say, here it is. And we're starting to get a little away from that, which is just kind of amazing to me.
That is amazing.
So it's really cool. People should come to the museum and see it for sure.
Cool. And do we know how long it's going to be in Chicago?
It's a permanent.
Permanent.
That's
I
exciting.
mean, how these things happen are really interesting tales that are really specific to fossils. So if you're a museum and you want a fossil like that and you want to preserve it for science, you have to be very stealth about purchasing it, because a lot of wealthy people who are collectors, fossil collectors, would come in and outbid someone like us, and then that specimen would be off of the scientific market and in someone's very fancy home. So, and that's happened plenty of times to fossils. So in order to preserve it, it was like that with Sue the dinosaur too. In order to preserve it, you have to be sneaky about buying it, or they'll bid you out. It wouldn't be too hard to outbid a museum. We're not exactly rolling in dough, but there's always these elements of surprise. And then because of the scientific publishing process, we've been sworn to secrecy for this for a long time. A couple of years this bird's been in the museum. And when you publish things, you can't leak information that you're finding, because then the actual scientific publication isn't publishable anymore. Journals won't publish it because, hey, you published this in the Chicago Tribune, or someone published this in a note in some other obscure place, and so you have to keep it really quiet. And it takes a long time to really do this justice, to describe it with the amount of detail that it deserves. It takes a long time to prepare it. It was prepared I love this part of the story. It was prepared by two women in the museum, and its story is being told by them and by the female curator of dinosaurs. So that is people with very careful hands doing that. You can come in the museum and there's a fossil prep lab where you can take a look at how painstaking it is to separate the important parts of the animal from the rock that's surrounding it. And it takes a lot of expertise, a lot of patience, and a lot of skill. And that was not always applied to the other Archaeopteryx. That, times change, our abilities to do things change too.
Well, and the motivations change. So, again, as Shannon said earlier, the motivation here was to prep this specimen for science. And once you see it, you can understand when the experts will say, if you're prepping just for putting it up on a wall in your home, you're not really caring about necessarily the scientific value of it.
Yeah, if you lose a bone in the tail, not that big of a deal. Someone's still going to pay you a whole bunch of money to have it. And you probably aren't getting the most experienced preparators when that happens. Because if it's not designed, if you're not prepping it with the design to science, your motivations, like John just said, are really different. So if you want to get the most money from it, maybe you'll go take pictures of the other Archaeopteryx and fill in what's missing in yours not with the fossil, but with interpretations of that. And even then you try to make it look like it was actually there. But there are tools, imaging tools you can use to see that this is not fossil material anymore. So there's lots of things like that, you know.
Wow, so somebody would try to fill it in and get away with acting like that was...
Sure. You know, sensibilities have changed, too, about these things. And Sue has taught us how important it is to have
You mean the T-Rex?
The T-Rex, yeah. Has taught us how important it is to have careful preparation where you look through the whole rock. From a science perspective, you can see some parts of Sue's skeleton that if you weren't looking at it scientifically, you might not care about. You know, the bottom of the rib cage, for example, all those little bones that were dug out of the rock after the main part of Sue was out. And the same is true for this. There are parts of this new Archaeopteryx that are painstakingly looked for because the scientific expertise is there to know what to look for and to care about finding every bit of it that's possible. So it's really cool.
Cool. We need to make it down there. I'm excited.
Yeah.
It could actually enter into the next round robin we have.
Yeah.
Archaeopteryx.
That's fair. I mean, I didn't know it had been announced, and I was on some meeting, and all of a sudden I kept getting text after text after text. I'm like, what on earth is happening? And I looked down eventually, and it was a whole bunch of people, ornithologists, nerdy ornithologists, texting. How do you know? Well, and it had been announced while we were on this call.
That's awesome.
Thanks everyone for listening. In case you missed our announcement last week, we wanted to tell you again, we're really excited that in 2025, we're going to be doing a little mini-series on the book The Feather Thief, around 4 or 5 episodes, where we'll break down the book in more detail, and then are going to chat with the author, Kirk Wallace Johnson. We're super excited about this. If you aren't familiar with the book, it's true crime and birds and museums and just the wildest true story. As curators of birds at the Field Museum in Chicago, John and Shannon are the perfect people to break it all down. From Alfred Russel Wallace's bird collection, some of which are in the Field Museum with John and Shannon, to talking a little bit more about some of the rare birds that were stolen in the book, to the importance of museum collections and the value that they serve to the science community, to the horrific crime that was committed in the book. There's a lot to discuss, and we're super pumped to dive into it in more detail. Okay, that's it for this week. We just wanted to let everybody know we hope you all have a safe and happy New Year's. We'll be thinking about you. Cheers to 2024 and hopefully great things on the horizon in 2025. Reminder, if you have a question, you can reach us at podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. See you all in the new year. Love you all. Thanks everyone for listening. Happy New Year!